So with Zscaler Private Access, I come to admin.private.zscaler.com. Again, I log in with my administrator credentials. Again, this wouldn't be populated if it was a first principles, but I've already passed some traffic through this account. So we'll start off and we'll look at administrators. So administrators are down here. I've got a number of different administrators defined. Here is my default one, but I could have different administrators that only have read-only access. This one here is an SSO admin. And so if I look at these different roles, I can have a number of different roles that say, okay, this is an SSO admin. Let's edit this. And we can see that they've only got access to view the configuration, look at the dashboard and diagnostics, but they've got no ability to look at any of the configuration responsible for defining what applications pass through Zscaler, what policy is applied, or inspection. So we can create different roles, obviously aligned to different roles and responsibilities that people have. Okay, so let's have a look at deploying app connectors. So we start off with provisioning keys. Provisioning keys are a digital signature. They're a certificate essentially associated with a signing key and therefore tied to an app connector. So here I can see my provisioning key here. I've got an app connector group that I created, which was called London, and we've got an app connector defined. And so I have a single app connector, which interestingly decided it wants to restart in the middle of doing my demo, but we'll get to that in a second. And what we can do, we could SSH to that connector. And so if you were deploying your app connector, you'd come into this directory, you'd drop your provisioning key in here, you'd restart the services, and the app connector would read that provisioning key. It would send that provisioning key to Zscaler. It then encrypts it to say that it is now got a copy of it encrypted. It joins all the cloud, gets all of the certificate chain, and it's then joined to the cloud. So we're not going to do that today. We'll just take that as read, and later steps in this course, we'll talk through how to do this in more detail. Okay, so we have our app connectors set up and everything. So let's go have a look at application segments. So generally you would start off with a wildcard segment. So this is my internal namespace, star.welshgeek.net. We define it's a wildcard and everything will just deploy. We have our DNS search domains. Any client that enrolls will get a search domain very similar to DHCP. So if you access a server as a short name, it'll complete it to a fully qualified distinguished name. So server becomes server.welshgeek.net, and that will then match the wildcard. I've also created some specific segments. So I've got my certificate server defined here, a CentOS server, and an Apache server, and you'll notice different icons here. So the circle tells us it's a browser-based access application. It's an HTTP application that we're going to advertise to the internet for users that do not have a client, and we'll only do that over SSL. So we use this wildcard certificate that we've uploaded. For privileged remote access, we support SSH and RDP. So I have two applications defined, my CentOS server and a Windows certificate server, which is running RDP. You can see port 22 and 3389 for those. I've also defined an application called star.gov.uk. That is a source IP anchoring. So if we come back into Zscaler Internet Access, that gives us the ability to forward from Zscaler Internet Access through Zscaler Private Access. It has a number of different functions. That gives us the ability to inspect the traffic against all of the Zscaler Internet Access threat engines, but also because it is then egressing through Zscaler Private Access, we can provide a source IP anchor for that traffic. So if there are things that are country-based or fixed IP address-based applications, passing those through Zscaler Private Access gives us that capability. Okay, coming back to Zscaler Private Access, we now have some applications defined. We also have Zscaler Deception. Zscaler Deception gives us the ability to pass traffic to a managed deception client engine that gives us the ability to place lures on the endpoint and then follow those lures to fake applications in the Zscaler Deception Cloud. So let's look at the IDP configuration here. Very similar to Zscaler Internet Access. Again, I'm using Okta. Here is my sign-in URL. We have to unsign the SAML request because it's Okta, and Okta doesn't like signed auth requests. We're going to use the SAML attributes for policy. We can always test the SAML functionality by clicking import, and it'll do a SAML request. We see all of the sign-in responses and everything, and we have SCIM configured on this so that we can pull all of those groups, or Okta can push group membership or changes to user account details through to Zscaler, and we can then apply policy on that. When we look at policy, we have a couple of policy objects we have created here. So we've got our Zscaler Deception one. We've got our wildcard policy. At the beginning says any user can access any application. We have an isolation policy that says, if the user is coming with a web browser, so they're not using Zscaler Client Connector, they're using our browser-based access functionality, we don't want them to interact directly with the website because we don't trust them. We're going to isolate them. The user will get to interact with that website, but they'll only get the pixels scraped back to their machine, so they can't copy and paste data and things like that. From an inspection capability, we're also going to inspect the traffic to that Apache server. We'll go through the inspection policy in a second. So inspection policy, we're going to look at all of the OWASP top 10. We're going to look at some custom controls, look for some directory traversal. We're going to look for the log4j. If we see a user agent or we see a query string that has certain credentials in it. So we can now inspect the content and trigger blocks based on that. Okay. So next steps, we can have a look at some user portals. So we have a user portal created. This is what advertises those browser-based access applications to users. So we have a portal link to our Apache website. So again, as I said, we're going to advertise this externally, https apache.wellsgeek.net. So Zscaler is fronting it with SSL, passing it through Zscaler to access that private application internally. We also have the ability to download the Zscaler Client Connector directly from this portal. So that's what we're going to use to get the client out there. So here is the portal. This is the URL for the Zscaler app that we want to use. We've taken that from the mobile portal, so they're always published there. So we're going to use the latest version of the Zscaler Client Connector for Mac OS. Looking at our privileged portals. So again, we have a privileged portal called privaccess.wellsgeek.net. We have those consoles, CentOS and CertServe. Those two applications are advertised on that portal so that users can access those applications directly. And with that, I think all of our policy is defined and we're able to start setting up. So we have applications defined, we have SAML configuration defined, we have our portals defined. We can go ahead and install the client, but what we're going to do is we're going to start with using the browser-based access to get the client on there. So I'm going to open Safari. I'm going to use Safari for all of my demos here. And so we're going to open up private browsing session, and we're going to go to portal.wellsgeek.net. And as you can see, it's signing in via Okta. Okta is using transparent single sign-on. It's using Kerberos SSO to get me into the portal. Here is my browser-based access application. So if I go to apache.wellsgeek.net and I click that, it's going to follow that isolation profile. It's going to drop me into isolation, and then I'm able to see this application. So nice and simple, able to get to that application. If I go to Priv Access, again, that's the private access for privileged portals. I've got my two consoles there. I can go to my CentOS server. I could log in as nice and secure, log in as root, and access the web server. It's actually the Apache web server, and I can do all the interaction there, but again, it's screen scraped pixels to the browser. Or I could go to my certificate server, log in, I can enter my credentials here, and I'm able to get onto my certificate server and do anything that I need to do on that server to work through all of the different settings and everything within my server. So let's go and close these things down. Let's leave that page, exit this, and disconnect. We come back to user portal here, and we're going to download Zscaler Client Connector. So we want to allow that download, and it's going to drop it into my downloads folder. So here I am in the downloads folder. There is the installer. I've actually created a script which calls the application and passes a couple of arguments. It's going to send my user domain, and it's going to tell the client that I'm on the Zscaler 2 cloud. So if you're deploying the Zscaler Client Connector with Intune, SCCM, Workplace ONE, whatever it happens to be as your MDM, if you pass these credentials, it'll automatically start the client, and because the client understands what domain you're in and what Zscaler cloud you're on, it'll automatically trigger the SAML authentication process. So if we run this install script, it's going to prompt me to log whether I want to run it. I'm going to authenticate as my root account on my machine, and it's going to go ahead and install that client. The client will install, and you'll see there it's popped up, and it's automatically triggering the authentication process for Zscaler Internet Access, and then for private access, and then it goes ahead and installs. So if we open up the client now, we can see that we're enrolled for private access, Internet Access is connecting, Zscaler Digital Experience is connected as well. So that's going to sit there in the system tray, and everything's going to work. So now if I go to http://apache.welshgeek.net, I'm actually going through the Zscaler Client Connector. Interestingly, it's asking me to authenticate using certificates, and we're connected to that application directly. And you can see it's different because I'm able to interact directly with the website. Let's go to my favorite gambling site, 888.com. You can see I've been blocked going to 888.com, so my traffic for Zscaler Internet Access is passing through, but I also have the ability to use that password override. So I can click here, it's going to hit my Okta tenant, which authenticated me, and that enabled me to pass through. Generally, the way you would do that is, for example, with schools, you'd have the teacher being the person that entered their credentials on that Okta page. They'd be the only person that's allowed to authenticate. If I go to hmrc.gov.uk, you remember that star.gov.uk was the website I created for source IP anchoring. So all of that traffic is actually hitting the Zscaler Internet Access Cloud for all the inspection, SSL inspection policy. We can click on this, we can see the certificate, and you can see that it's signed by that intermediate certificate that's trusted all the way up to my root CA of my organization. So Zscaler is doing the SSL inspection, and everything's passing through transparently. We'll look at the logs in a second. From a private access perspective, let's look at a couple of things. We can go to our remote desktop, and we could connect to any number of different servers now. I could connect to my domain controller, and this traffic will pass through Zscaler Private Access and shows all my DNS and everything that I've got going on there. Let's go and map a network drive to a server. We're going to connect to another domain controller. We're going to connect to the www root share using SMB, and we'll connect over to that, and that's just worked. The other thing that we'll see if we run a KList, which tells me about my Kerberos tickets, we can see that we got the Kerberos tickets for Okta and CIFS all passing through, the Kerberos ticket for the file share passing through Zscaler as well. You can see the time and date. Interestingly, it's a minute ahead. Let's jump in here and take a look at the logs and some of the analytics. So we can see the traffic passing through. Here is the domain controller, port 88 for Kerberos. There's my map network drive, my Apache servers, my certificate server for remote desktop, the CentOS server for port 22 SSH, and some other SMB traffic. If we look into the raw logs, you can see all of those things in real time in the order that traffic came through. So we can see things like the access to the application and getting the Kerberos ticketing. We can see the Apache server, we can see the RDP traffic. If we come back to the dashboard, we can look at inspection. We can see that actually we didn't have any security violations, but we did see traffic pass through. And from the web inspection logs, we can see that we accessed the application and we can see data about the user and the traffic flow through there. We were accessing the Apache server. If we come back over to Zscaler Internet Access and look at the dashboard, we see a lot more traffic passing through. We can go to Web Insights. We could look at the raw logs for the last 5 minutes and apply filters. And so we'll see all of the traffic. We see that 888.com and then allowed you to override. We can see the HMRC traffic passing through, and we'd be able to see that it's been forwarded through for Zscaler Private Access for source IP anchoring as well. So we get all the analytics for all of the traffic as it passes through the cloud, including all of the inspection and everything that goes through.